When I met my wife, she seemed perfect. We were in love and happy. But as time passed, I noticed that she was spending more and more time with her male friends, and I began to suspect that she was hiding something from me. I discovered that she was in a relationship with two men at once and was lying to me about going to work when she was actually going on dates with them. I was hurt and angry, and I started planning my revenge. I was determined to not let my wife get away with what she had done. And when I finally came up with a plan, I put it into action. Diane and Alexei had been married for 2 years. Diane was 26 and her husband was in his 40s. The young woman was initially attracted to Alexei because of his status and wealth. He had several successful businesses, although you wouldn't know it by looking at him. He dressed modestly and didn't stand out, and under different circumstances, Diana would not have paid attention to him. She had only been a model for a couple of years and was used to a certain lifestyle. She only chose things that she felt were suitable for her level. So when Alexei approached her in a cafe where Diana was having a drink, she didn't even give him a second glance and refused to get to know him. But when she saw his expensive car, she called out to him. After they got married, Alexei forbade Diana from working as a model. She didn't mind because he provided for her completely, and she was able to live the luxurious life she had always wanted. Looking at them as a couple, it was obvious that such a beautiful woman would never have fallen in love with this man. He wasn't flashy or attractive. He was already starting to go bald. When they went out together, Diana wasn't very happy, so she often spent time with her girlfriends at restaurants and spas. That's how she spent her free time. Anton met her at one of these restaurants. He had no idea that this beautiful woman was single. Diana always took off her wedding ring when she went out with her friends or went out alone. When she saw Anton approaching her, she immediately liked him. He was young, incredibly handsome, and his physique showed that he was into sports and took care of himself. Anton was much more attractive than her husband. They sat down and got to know each other, and a conversation started. Without any hesitation or guilt, Diana gave Anton her phone number. From that day on, their affair began. They had endless conversations and phone calls. Phone calls and correspondence with Anton turned into romantic dates, which gradually became intimate. They would meet at his house or a hotel. To Anton's surprise, Diana always insisted on not staying overnight, claiming that she felt more comfortable sleeping at home. Even then, Anton never suspected that she was married. One time, when her husband was away for work for an extended period, she planned a short vacation with her girlfriends. Of course, Diana went to the resort with Anton, where they had a wonderful weekend together. She was able to hide her secret relationship from her husband, lying convincingly and keeping all the details in her head to avoid suspicion. She was content with her comfortable life with her husband, while Anton was her escape, so to speak. She had no expectations or desires for anything serious with her lover, as it was just a form of entertainment for her. However, things were different for Anton. After 4 months of frequent meetings and dates, he began to realize that he was falling in love and that their relationship, which had started casually, was becoming more serious to him. One day, after being intimate, he emotionally took Diana's hand and asked her to move in with him. She froze and blinked frequently, showing no joy on her face. In fact, deep down, she was even disappointed. "I'll think about it," she answered with a strained smile after a long silence. She knew this could ruin everything for him. She didn't want anything serious with her lover, only fun, and his proposal put their relationship in question. From that day on, she started responding to his messages less frequently and would not pick up his calls. She would drop the call and claim to be busy. Anton initially thought it was due to her bad mood or being busy. But one day, when he asked her directly, she told him she no longer wanted to continue the relationship. She blocked him after that message. He was unhappy that their relationship ended abruptly, but more importantly, he couldn't understand why. Everything seemed to be going well between them. They enjoyed each other's company and were happy together. But as soon as he mentioned something more serious, Diana was gone. For the next few weeks, Anton couldn't stop thinking about the situation. The relationship he had invested so much time and energy in had ended suddenly. They hadn't seen Sasha for months, as Anton spent all of his free time with Diana. Can you imagine? She left me like a puppy, proclaimed Anton, taking a sip of his beer and averting a gloomy look. Sasha looked at his friend, but didn't dare to say what was on his mind. The thing is, Sasha worked in a bank, and just the other day one of their big clients came in with his wife. Having seen Diana in photographs, Sasha immediately recognized her as the client's wife. Listen, Sasha began, and proceeded to tell Anton about Diana's deception and the fact that she was actually married. After hearing the story, Anton sat there feeling like he'd been hit by a ton of bricks. Can you get her husband's phone number? He suddenly asked, his tone serious. What? But that goes against our internal rules. Sasha hesitated. Please, Anton pleaded, and Sasha reluctantly nodded in agreement. It was clear that Anton wanted revenge on Diana for playing such a cruel game with his feelings while also deceiving her own spouse. Anton decided to call Alexei and tell him everything, but his call was dropped several times. Frustrated, he resorted to writing a text message revealing all the facts that proved Diana's infidelity. With a sense of accomplishment, Anton finally managed to distract himself from his business. However, he didn't anticipate one thing. That evening, Diana had her husband's phone in her hands and was the first to read the incriminating messages. Alexei had nothing to hide, as the phone was always kept in a prominent place at home. While her husband was away, Diana quickly deleted all the messages and blocked Anton, preventing him from contacting her husband again. Another month passed, and Anton was confident that the unfaithful wife had been kicked out of the house, receiving the punishment she deserved. He had even managed to calm down internally, but fate had a different plan for him. After a successful day at work, Anton decided to have dinner at his favorite restaurant. To his surprise, he saw his former lover there, but she wasn't alone. She was with her husband. Anton's anger boiled over. Deep down, he still hadn't forgiven Diana and wanted revenge. He walked over to their table, grabbed a chair from a nearby table, and sat down next to her without any regard for manners. What do you want? Asked a surprised Alexei. My name is Anton. Didn't you read my message about your wife? Anton said with a smirk. Diana shouted, her face pale with fear. Call security. What other message are you who? The worried husband did not understand. I'll show you, replied Anton and pulled out his phone. Before the guards arrived, he had time to tell and show Alexei everything he wanted. Joint photos, correspondence, the tickets he bought them, the two of them, for the trip. You could tell by the look on Alexei's face that he was seeing all this for the first time. She cheated on you for almost 6 months. I didn't even know she was married. I hope you will act like a reasonable person, Anton said as he got up from the table and headed for the exit. As parting, he smiled slyly at Diana, who sat neither dead nor alive. As expected, Alexei, after such convincing evidence, did not believe his wife's excuses. The divorce followed immediately. In an instant, Diana lost her beautiful house, limitless amounts of money, and the usual comfortable life. Of course, she was able to win back some amount, but with her extravagant lifestyle, that money was not enough for a long time. Sometime after the divorce, the woman tried to get back to her modeling career, but she got the hint that she was no longer desired on the big catwalks. After that, she had to look for a regular job, but her dreams of a luxurious life did not fade, and she continued to meet wealthy and promising men. A couple of times, she even fell for the tricks of swindlers who only pretended to be rich and successful. However, fate had many more surprises in store for her, so she could learn her life lessons in full. Second story, I'd always been sure I had a wonderful family. I trusted my wife and never suspected that she was capable of cheating. But one day, when I saw my boss starting to get too involved with my wife, I began to suspect that something was wrong. I never would have thought that my wife was capable of cheating on me, but soon I began to notice a strange change in her behavior. She became too interested in her work, had new interests and activities, and paid less and less attention to me. I began to suspect that she was cheating on me, but I could not even imagine that my boss could become her lover. However, my fears proved correct. I had to get revenge for the cheating. I began to devise a plan of revenge to finally regain my honor and dignity. Lyosha and Masha had been married for 8 years. Their marriage, as Alexei said, was held together by silly jokes and teenage crushes. When he was 30 and his wife just turned 27, they had a son. More recently, the baby was 3 years old, and he went to kindergarten and Maria finally went to work. During her absence, some things changed in the company, including the director. The woman was meeting him for the first time, and was surprised at what a wonderful man he was. The man's name was Pyotr Alexeyevich, and he was almost 10 years older than Maria. She, just out of maternity leave, was hungry for communication with people and for men's attention, and was flattered by the fact that her boss was obviously flirting with her. Masha flirted with him, trying not to break boundaries, but it was obvious that Pyotr Alexeyevich did not mind taking things further. The flirting did not last more than a month. One day, the boss summoned Maria to his office, closed the door from the inside, and executed his plan. Although the woman showed some initial hesitation, she was not completely against it. However, she made it clear that she did not want to be touched. After what happened, every time she saw her boss, Maria's cheeks would turn red with embarrassment. She would avoid eye contact and mumble during their conversations. He was surprisingly strict with her, but whenever he had the chance, he would pinch or lightly slap her buttocks. One day after work, when everyone had left the office, the two lovers were sitting together. Peter was smoking by the window and Maria was getting dressed. "Don't be offended that I talked to you so rudely in front of everyone," he suddenly said. As Masha was buttoning her blouse, she grinned. "Yeah, I figured as much. Conspirator. Gotta get ready. I promised my wife I'd get home on time." The man put out his cigarette and closed the window. Even though she had a husband and child waiting for her at home, Peter's words about his wife hurt her. She pressed her lips together and silently continued packing. The frequent delays at work had taken their toll. Lyosha, who had never been jealous of his beloved, suddenly became nervous. He kept asking why Maria was late, as this had never happened before. He would call several times a day to ask his wife what she was doing at work. The woman was angry at the sudden control that he had over her. "Don't call me so much," she hissed into his phone when Alexei once again decided to make sure his wife was really at work. "You're embarrassing me. I'm just worried," her husband shouted at her. "You'd watch your son like that," Maria retorted. Usually an irritated Masha would hang up after that and grumble to herself for a long time about how unhappy she was with Lyosha's behavior. Several times she began to sob at work when, after a quarrel with her husband, Pyotr Alexeyevich suddenly decided to scold her in front of his colleagues. The woman was choking on tears of resentment, sitting in the toilet and causing her coworkers to feel sorry for her, not realizing that she herself had caused the whole mess. On one such day, Peter asked Maria to stay late after work to finish her reports. But she was so offended by what he said in the afternoon that she suddenly refused to do it. The situation was weighing on her. Fighting with her husband, being humiliated by her boss in front of everyone, she was tired of it. She wanted to break the vicious cycle that was bringing her more misery than pleasure. Hearing her refusal, Peter was surprised. He stepped so close to her that only Masha could hear what he said, and whispered, "You have no right to refuse." "And what will you do to me?" Angry tears froze in her eyes. She looked at her boss with a challenge, ready to defend her position to the end. But what she heard made the ground fall out from under her feet. "What am I gonna do? I'll tell your husband all the details of what happened. And for him to believe it, I will tell him about Rudinka in a special place." Peter spoke angrily but calmly. He was sure of himself and his actions. This argument was stronger than any other that Maria could say to him in response. "Tonight you will stay," he repeated in a louder voice. Peter Alexeyevich left, and a pale Maria remained standing with her mouth open, grabbing the edge of the table to keep from falling. Her lover's words pulsed in her ears, keeping her awake. A mask of horror froze on her face. Masha somehow waited until the door closed behind the last of her colleagues. When she finally pulled herself together and got up from the table, her phone rang. Her husband's name was on the screen. The situation couldn't have been more absurd. The woman decided not to answer. In half an hour, she would call him back and lie that she had left the phone lying in her bag and had not heard him. Peter Alexeyevich was already waiting for her at his place. Suddenly, the rose-colored glasses fell from Maria's eyes. The man no longer seemed as attractive as before. Now she saw before her not the man beside whom passion and desire warmed her, but a pompous, narcissistic creep who thought of threatening her. Peter was smiling contentedly. He was like a cunning fox who had lured his next victim into his trap. "What a clever girl," he said, making the right choice. "Aren't you afraid I'll tell your wife everything?" Masha said in a trembling voice. The man laughed. "Do you think she doesn't know? She's fine with everything. Money, turns a blind eye to many problems." Maria had nothing to say. Her attempt to threaten her lover the way he threatened her failed, and the woman didn't really expect it to work. At this point, she did not know that her phone was still ringing off the hook with her spouse, and Alexei himself was already halfway to the place where Masha worked. In his mind, Lyosha had already imagined the worst of it. He vividly saw how he now burst into the office, finding his wife there with a man he did not know. He imagined everything down to the smallest detail, which only made him angrier. Alexei felt that his wife was deceiving him. He had noticed a nearly disappeared bruise on her shoulder before, and Masha claimed she had rubbed it with a sports bag. The man didn't believe a word of it. He told the guard that he had come to get his wife and began to walk up. Each successive step was harder than the last, as if two heavy weights were hung on his legs, preventing him from reaching his destination. His heart was beating against his ribs, as if it was about to jump out of his chest. Alexei tried to catch his breath before entering. For a few moments he hesitated to press the handle of the door, finally entering after controlling himself. The lights were on in the corridor and in several other offices. Lyosha looked over to where Maria's desk was. His wife wasn't at her desk, but her things were there and her phone was on the table. The man listened. The silence was broken by muffled slaps coming from the back office, where the door was not fully closed. He opened the door with a kick, sharply and without delay. The scene before him made his teeth grind against each other and his fists clench. On the table, in a pile of papers, sat Maria with a man in a white shirt nestled between her legs. When he heard someone enter, he quickly pulled away from Masha, trying to pull up his pants. Alexei roared and lunged at his wife's lover with his fists. A fight ensued, which the woman unsuccessfully tried to break up. Finally, she wrapped both arms around her husband's neck and forced him away from his rival. Only then did Lyosha look into his wife's face for the first time. She was sitting crying with mascara dripping down her cheeks. The remnants of her lipstick were smeared and Maria looked miserable. When they got in the car, they both didn't know what to say. Lyosha kept wiping his lips, which were smashed by Peter, with a napkin. At that moment, he only wanted one thing, for Masha to disappear. He was disgusted to be around her. On the contrary, she wanted to burrow into her husband's arms to tell him how it was, to make him understand and forgive her. But no one's wish came true that day. Alexei filed for divorce as soon as he could. Maria begged him not to. She sobbed into his phone, promising that everything would change and that this would not happen again. But her husband was as hard as a rock. It was not in his plans to change his decision. The decision was made for the woman to quit her job. Among her colleagues, there were rumors about her relationship with her boss. He himself was extremely persistent and asked Masha to leave, which she did. The sudden changes in her life knocked her off balance. She held on as best she could because she had a son whom Maria could not let down. After her divorce, she often thought of Alexei. It was only when they divorced and he cut off all communication with her that she understood the phrase her mother liked to repeat, that we do not appreciate what we have until we lose it. So that's the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters.